Hi, I'm Carol Kachadoorian from dblTilde Collaborative in Oxford, Maryland, and I'm introducing my presentation called Cycling Uphill in the Headwind of Ageism. I'm going to talk about ageism in general, ageism in cycling, and how we as planners, designers, and advocates can incorporate the needs of older adults in our work. I look forward to talking with you. Thank you.
Hi, it's Carol again. So again, we're going to talk about ageism's effect on cycling and other types of physical activity, seeing through the lens of for planners, designers, and advocates. Ageism has a pretty ugly face. I have heard things such as this quote and this quote. I've also heard some ageism when thinking about cycling, such as this. And I'm guessing you've heard something such as this. And yet we know that professional cyclists often use lower gears.
There's no worse feeling than being overgeared on a climb and just not being able to turn the pedals. Always err on the side of having lighter gears. If you don't use it, you don't use it, but it's there. And if you've got a bad day where you have a sugar low or anything, you will use it. So make sure you're geared for the climb you're going to climb.
Ageism is rarely equated with discrimination. It typically is not part of the discussions we're having worldwide about social justice. And yet, with luck, all of us grow old, all of us experience the impact of growing old, and it is something that links us all together. However, a study that was done at the University of Michigan show that of those surveyed, 82% experienced ageism in their everyday lives, whether it was messages or interpersonal interactions. And just over a third of them internalized this. And it typically has a negative effect on one's self-esteem. However, in that same study, many people said that they feel more comfortable with themselves as they're aging. They have a sense of purpose. And they actually think their lives are better than they thought they would be. So because of this dichotomy, we're going to take what's called an intersectional approach to the topic, which identifies social categorizations given to a group of people or a person that can result in discrimination or disadvantage. And we're talking about it to create an awareness in the work that we do so that we can ground those differences. We're going to start by looking at the numbers. In the United States, in about 15 years, the number of people over 65 will be greater than the number of people under 18. Can be considered kind of scary. So let's take a closer look at aging and cycling. Older age can last up to 40 years, depending upon how long you live and when you start counting. And we know its vitality and level of engagement varies by person, often because of something called the difference between chronological versus mental or felt age. Now, you might be wondering why there are photos of Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan. It's because a year ago, both in their 80s, they released new albums. And the reviewer that I heard reviewing both albums was very complimentary of the work that they had done. She said a number of things, including what we think of as old age became a much more active and engaged phase of life, which resulted in this work. I've given that a lot of thought, and I actually think it's what we who are aging feel about that phase of life, not so much about people who are younger. And for us, the difference between chronological and felt or mental age is either a juggling act or a balancing act. The National Institutes of Health did a survey of people that were over 65 to learn if they felt younger or the same or older. And you can see from the bright blue and the bright green that the vast majority of people felt younger or felt the same. So this is a sign that chronological age is not so much a factor in how we interact with the world. What happens is we take that objective facts about our physical health, sort of incorporate that in the way we live our lives, and that results in the mental health that we have as we go through our daily lives. Again, it's either a juggling or a balancing act. We know that cycling provides a way for people to remain vital, to remain engaged, and fulfilled as they age. But there's always a catch with things, and we need to be willing as we age to adapt. This is what I learned from a woman that I met at a bike shop.
Even if you have problems, physical problems, which will occur as you get older, you don't have to take the most difficult bike rides. You can change your location, change the style of riding, and buy an electric bike. Maybe that'll help.
So, with that as backdrop, how we think about older adults oftentimes begins with how we see them. And I'm going to ask you how you see some older adults. Perhaps they're older. So think about how old these cyclists are. What did you see when you looked at these silhouettes? What were the clues that you used? Their overall body shape, their weight, their clothing. Ask yourself if there was some implicit bias or assumptions that you used. And we know that happens. This is a positive example of silhouettes showing bicyclists that was developed by the Federal Highway Administration. It shows profiles. Bicyclists design user profiles for 3 types of bicyclists that we use often in the United States for designing low-stress networks. And except for the child on the tag-along, it is pretty difficult to see the ages of these people. On the other hand, this is an example that was used by a local government. It is kind of difficult to see the ages of the people in the first 3 categories. But because a cane oftentimes is used as an indication of older adults, it appears to me as this 4th category of no way, no how is an older adult with a cane, which also says that older adults don't cycle. This is an alternative view, something that I put together that uses images of older adults cycling for each of the types of cyclists. So taking our clue from the images and moving on to data, I actually did a Google search to find older adult icons and was pretty discouraged to see that a cane or mobility device or sort of leaning over oftentimes is used for older adults. So we're going to push back against that and rethink the way, at least in the United States, we break out people by demographic groups and data for our data. These 4 age groups are typically what we use, and you can see that people over 65 are typically shown with a cane. We can break that out into 2 categories, maybe keeping the cane for people over 80. But we can break that even further by starting at 35 and coming up with 4 age groups. If we want to even get more precise age groups, if you're doing some work that deals with older adult communities, you can break it out even more into 3 age groups for these last 2 groups. And you can even use images and icons that reflect the physical activity in that community, such as biking, hiking, and golf. Active aging in place therefore includes keeping cycling and walking as an option for people as they age, regardless of sort of how far they cycle or how strenuously they cycle. So in addition to these words and images and looking at the data, what else is there? What other tools do we have in the work that we do? I'm going to talk about three tools, beginning with an older adult typology. This is a typology that I developed of 4 types of older adults based upon ability and need, or inclination and lifestyle. And the goal in our work is to message and engage and propose recommendations for people at each type, so that their inclination to be physically active goes to the right and their ability to be active goes up. Active aging in place tool, another tool, is the person environment fit approach. It's a very simple concept. Does the built environment fit the person who expects to use it? Because we know people will adapt their behavior based upon the built environment and may adjust their personal goals and preferences. This can affect the built environment. If it doesn't fit, can affect their sense of community, their sense of social connectedness. Importantly, the amount of physical activity in which they engage, such as cycling, and their overall quality of life. It's not only about the individual pieces, which oftentimes we think, well, we have this piece, so we've done our job, but it's really about the whole network. And that leads us into another tool called life space mobility. The life space mobility theory is based upon 6 spaces that we move in our lives, from our bedrooms to beyond. The first 3 are really in the purview of healthcare providers, social workers, to encourage and find ways for older adults to remain in their homes so they don't have to go to a care facility. And they tend to measure, life space mobility measures the person, how independently they travel in those spaces, and how frequently they travel. But it doesn't, outside the home, it doesn't really measure the public realm, and that's really where the rest of aging in place is. So when somebody walks out their gate and onto the street in their neighborhood, that's where our work begins. So depending upon what they see, how that environment fits them, how far that fit goes depends upon how far they go into the life space mobility spaces. So these are 3 tools, and I ask you to think about the following question. How do we advance active aging in place? How do we measure the built environment's ability to serve life space mobility for older cyclists? Can we adapt the person environment fit approach or some other approach? And do we begin with a typology of physical activity for older adults? It is a complex issue that's affected by our understanding of aging, any implicit bias we have, and how both of these affects our work. So revisit this intersectional approach. Remember, we're trying to understand it, to become more aware, acknowledge any implicit biases, and ground those differences. I want to tell you a little bit about my research. First, I'm in year 4 of the 50+ cycling survey. Hopefully you have either seen or will see the video that Trey Hahn from the Urban Cycling Institute and I did of results from the year 3 survey that's shown in this data book on the right. If you are over 50 and live in the United States or know someone who does, I'd ask you to take the year 4 survey. Just snap that QR code and take the survey. I'm also working with some researchers in California to study 9 older adult living communities, whether they're active living or continuous care. We're also talking with the local jurisdictional staff that do transportation and planning. And we're trying to determine how those communities offer ways to cycle within them, how well they're connected to external areas, and what local jurisdictions do to encourage cycling and other physical activity for older adults. That's my presentation. Thank you very much. And if you have time, I have a little epilogue for you.
Back in the day when pots and pans could talk, which indeed they still do, there lived a man that went to the river every day and filled 2 pots with water. Well, one day, one of the pots developed a small crack, and as time went on, that crack widened until by the time the man got home, all the water had leaked out of the pot. Finally, the pot turned to the man and said, "Please, every day you take me to the river. Every day the water leaks out. Please, replace me with another pot." And the man turned to the pot and said, "Look down the trail." And the pot looked down the trail. And on the side of the trail with the pot that didn't have a crack, it was craggy and rocky. But on the side of the path with the pot with the crack, wildflowers grew. The man said, "Every day you water those flowers. Every day you make my difficult journey beautiful." I think I'll keep